The Lollards were out, they were still moving the Bibles, those Bibles around, and those were transcripts. They were all hand copied. And every time they got caught at doing it, they got burned at the stake. Okay, so a lot of those people died doing that. And he was a heretic according to the church, and he died before they could execute him. But he was headed for execution, no doubt about it. And he had major impacts beyond just England. And there's an example here as far away as Prague in Czechoslovakia. This man here, John Mikolov, he had been a priest, but stripped of his priesthood, burned at the stake for daring to challenge the church. And who did he refer back to? Wycliffe. And so those Bibles had made their way into the main part of Europe and also throughout England. This is Wycliffe Bibles. And they're just beautiful. But anyway, that's in the British Library, all handwritten, which is absolutely gorgeous. Okay. William Tyndale. Tyndale was kind of born into a wealthy family. Okay, so here's where the trouble starts, right? Who's he study? Luther, right? And so he is going to be at odds with the church, no doubt about it. Okay, so I talked about the Erasmus already. England, at the time that he was born, was the only country that did not have its own translation. And so Tyndale decided, yes, sir, that's Rome. Well, what eventually became the Catholic Church, it was the Roman Church at that time. Okay, so Tyndale sets about doing a translation, and he knew Greek. But he didn't have the funds to actually go and do a full translation. So he goes to the Bishop of London looking for help, and of course, the church, part of the church, Tyndale expected them to help him, and they said no, they would not help him at all. And so finally, there's a group called the Christian Brethren. They were importers, and there's like an informal group of Christians, and they were also smugglers. Okay, and so they were importing and smuggling in the Lutheran documents into England. So basically, the church is basically trying to hold back the tide. It is the whole business of them actually controlling what people are thinking and doing is just it's falling apart. And the Lollards were the distribution group. So because they just traveled around England. Okay. So Tyndale gets declared as a heretic, and he heads off for Germany, and he ends up in Cologne, Germany, and there he starts turning out the New Testament, and there are these people who helped him. They were an apostate Franciscan friar, William Roy, and basically they weren't friends, but they were working colleagues. One of the things that is a big deal is Germany at that time, especially in Cologne, was under the Catholic control. And so that's bad news for Tyndale, and there were spies who were actually looking for him. And the plan was they were going to kill him, right, if they could. There was a Luther hater, Johann Cochleus, and basically he let this drunken printer let slip to him that there were Bibles being printed. Okay, so the jig is up for Tyndall, and he heads out of Cologne, and he goes to Worms, Germany. Okay,
No, Worms.
Worms. Yeah, Worms. And it completed the New Testament in 1526. Okay, and those copies, they're being printed now, lots of them being smuggled into England. Okay, and so they couldn't really stop it. And the Bishop of London actually went to Germany, bought up a bunch of copies of Tyndall's Bible, and burned them. Okay, so I mean, they just hated this guy. And the people who were associated with him ultimately ended up dead. His lawyer ended up in the Tower of London. His young scholars and the smugglers, anytime they were caught, they were executed. So Miles Coverdale was a man that he met up with. And if you've ever heard of the Coverdale Bible, that's that guy. He helped Tyndall print copies of the Pentateuch, and all that stuff was making its way into England. Okay, and Tyndall's still on the run. It's not like everything's forgiven. If the church could have caught him, they would have killed him immediately. Okay, so this is. Now put this in here. This is probably the most important thing in here, this little chart right here. The language that we find in our Bibles, our modern Bibles, was mostly generated, the translations was generated by Tyndall. And things like, let there be light, and there was light. He is the one that translated Greek in the Old Testament into that. Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Under the sun, my brother's keeper, land of the living. And then he invented new words. And those are scapegoat, long-suffering, busybody, and Passover. And so when you look at that on our modern Bibles, you'll see that kind of language in there. That's Tyndall. He had huge influence on all of the Bibles after that. Right. So when you read through it, you'll see that kind of stuff. And there's a lot more besides those. Okay. Now we get back to the politics and Tyndall's downfall. So he got caught up. Henry VIII was the king at that time. He wanted to dump his current wife, which was Catherine of Aragon, and marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn, right? And of course, in the church, in the Roman church at that time, that was a no-no. Okay, so Tyndall's on the run. But sometime prior to that, Tyndall had written The Obedience of a Christian Man and How Christian Rulers Ought to Govern. Henry VIII said, oh, this is my ticket, right? This is my ticket because I still want to be a good Catholic. I just have a problem with the Pope. And so figured Tyndall can now be rehabilitated because he gave the king an out. So now he's in the king's good graces, right? But Tyndall wouldn't do that. He would not be rehabilitated unless Henry VIII said, we are going to print an English version of the Bible. Henry refused. Tyndall is still on the run. So ultimately, Tyndall is betrayed by this young man, Henry Phillips. And he ended up in Velvoorde Castle in, I think it is Worms, Germany. Okay, never left. And so it's interesting the time frames here because things are so close together. Basically, Anne Boleyn gets pregnant. Henry now has to make a decision of whether he's going to continue with the church or not. He makes a break with the church. He is now the head of the English church, and then So now they need their own Bible. Problem is that Tyndale is in Germany, and eventually he gets executed. And Coverdale is the guy who brought that Bible back and said, here is a version of it. Okay. This is the Tyndale Bible, New Testament, copies of it. Okay. I have just a couple more. I'll need to finish up here pretty quick.
Go ahead.
So, King James was, starting off, he was King James VI of Scotland. He was in line to become the king in England after Queen Elizabeth I died, which she did, and King James now heads from Scotland down into heading on the way to London. Now, on his way down there, he was taking a lot of time to get down there, and he was introducing himself and glad-handing with all of the landowners and everything. So what happens is the Puritans, remember the Puritans and the Mayflower, those guys give him a letter. It's called the Millenary Petition. And what they're complaining about is, you're the head of the church, and we want you to fix it because there's all kinds of problems. And they were a very conservative group. Okay, so that ultimately ends up with the Hampton Court Conference in 1604. There was a plague, so they had to delay it. All right, so generally, there was a 3-day conference, and during that conference, it was decided that the Bishop of London would head up the effort to write a new Bible, to create a new Bible. And that guy just hated the Puritans. And he thought they were just way off the deep end conservative. And so, but he was looking for a step up to become the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so he figured this was his path if he was successful. So he set up companies. And the different companies took different parts of the Bible and they translated it. And they went all the way back to Hebrew and the original Greek. And in those groups, he put a couple of Puritans in there just to satisfy them. Okay? So in the end, they ended up in AD 1611. Basically what is now the King James Version of the Bible. So that was the Bible of 1611. So there are 39 books of the Old Testament, 14 in the Apocrypha. I told you that earlier. And then 27 books of the New Testament. And of course, a lot of people, Protestants, like it. But the important thing is, it was the Tyndale New Testament that really made its way into that. So even though Tyndale had been executed, the king had basically not acknowledged him. That was how the Tyndale Bible had a huge influence on the current Bible. So I have a couple other slides, but this is probably one of the important ones. So this is on a continuum. If you look up here, there's the different types of Bibles. This is called a dynamic equivalence on this end, and then this is word for word. And you can see here's the King James Version, and basically it makes its way into the NASB. There's the ESV Bible, where it was a derivative of this, and then also Greek text. The one that I like is over here, Thought for Thought. And basically, it's based on the Greek text and also Hebrew. And if you look in the forward of my Bible, it says that. But where's Tyndale? Right here. And where does he feeds up into all of these. He had a huge impact on everything that is our modern day Bibles. And so anyway, my last slide. So what does it all mean? And why should I care? Those are Dan questions. Okay, so what is it all? First of all, I always ask, is it a salvation issue, which version we use? And the answer is no. So it's all history, all the way from the hieroglyphics unsealed, the Latin Vulgate, all of those things. And a lot of people died, and we've only talked about a few of them. God either intervened, and I would argue that in St. Catherine's in the Sinai, God intervened to save those texts. But basically, the message is consistent. Love, salvation, forgiveness. And you see it all through the Bible, regardless of which version you use. And we can be assured that this is what God intended if they follow those rules, those tenets there. And that's how we got the Bible. So, anyway.
Thank you.
Yep.
Woo!